All right, guys. So let's get started. So, if you guys attended the previous session, we know what we learned about Splunk, right? So we'll in this lecture get started about Splunk architecture. So, guys, welcome to this live session by Intellipaat. In this session, we'll be covering the Splunk architecture. It is a continuation of a session that I did in the morning. That was at 12:30. Now this is our next session. All right. So guys, this is the agenda for today's session. So we'll basically go through a Splunk brief overview. Any of those people who are here who missed out on the earlier session, I'll just give you guys a brief intro about what Splunk is, and then we'll quickly move on towards Splunk components and then Splunk architecture. All of that will be covered in the second topic. In the third topic, I'll talk about how data is actually indexed into Splunk, how data flows through all the components of Splunk there are. All right. Then we'll move on to see the Splunk Web Console. I'll just show you guys how the Web Console works and what are the functional features of it. And then finally, we'll move on to further learning, and we will end the session by a Q&A session. But guys, feel free to ask anyway. I will get a message when you guys, ask a question. So I'll be answering there also. Right, so let's get started. So Splunk brief overview. So as we learned in the previous session, Splunk is a visual and analysis tool. It helps us to basically analyze all the data that we collect and visualize it. It's kind of like all your other monitoring tools, but it's more used for logging, right? So you know how systems produce logs, and that's what Splunk does. It collects logs and it monitors those logs. So if we go through again, we have a lot of enterprises that produce a lot of data from different sources, which basically produce copious amounts of data. This data has to be studied, processed, analyzed, and we get increased profits and efficiency once you study it. And that's what Splunk does. It takes data from different data sources, and it takes all the log files from them, and then it uses them, analyzes them, and visualizes them. So that's what Splunk does. So all right, I hope you guys know what Splunk is. So now we're going to move on to how does Splunk work. And in learning how does Splunk work, we need to learn the Splunk architecture. So guys, let's see the architecture. So we have two different kinds of environments here, which we'll be talking about. Now, someone asked a question in the previous session about how to learn Splunk, right? So we will tackle that question with single server environment. So we have two environments here, single server environment and the distributed environment. Keep in mind that single server environment is something for individual use, and distributed environment is used for your commercial use. All the big companies, if they ever use Splunk, they'll be using Splunk in a commercial way, will be through a distributed environment. So let's see what are these environments one by one. So we have a single server environment. Now, a single server is not used for actual deployment. A single component of Splunk is installed into a test Splunk component, or to have a proof of concept, or for a personal user learning. So like, if you want to test out a particular feature on your system itself, you can do that. You can install one part of Splunk on your system and then just test it out, right? So that's what you can do this single server environment, or you can create a proof of concept. You can see how it will be structured actually. So it will help you create a deployment plan when you're actually going to deploy your distributed environment. Then you can use it for your own purpose. If you want to index like very small amounts of data or something, just check out both the logs of your own system or your small app that you've created, or see if indexing is happening at all. Then you can you just use personally for each person. And again, for learning, it's very good for learning. If you're a beginner, you definitely use a single server environment. Now I'll show you guys where you can download Splunk from. Let's move on to distributed environment. So a distributed environment is the commercial thing. It's a Splunk Enterprise. That's what it's called. It's Splunk Enterprise. So when you download Splunk Enterprise, you get one component that you can configure it to become other components. And we will talk about these other components, and more on that later. So in a distributed environment, there are different services, different servers for specific Splunk components. So you have for components like forwarders, indexes, etc., etc. So it's basically like a hierarchy. You have a master and you have a slave, you have a managing component, you have a processing component, and they have a connection between them. That's what happens in a distributed environment. And again, it's very useful for scaling. So when you need to scale your own operation, if you have a big operation that you're working in, or if you have a big company where you have lots of servers, but you still want to increase your capability of producing that service, then you need to increase the number of servers. So you need to scale it. You need to scale to include more servers, and you need to monitor all of them. So when you're working with Splunk, it's very easy to do so. You don't have any troubles here and there. So guys, there's the single server environment and the distributed environment. So when you're working in a company, when you're working with the actual thing, it will be a distributed environment. And when you just need to use it for yourself, then it's a single server environment, right? So Splunk components. Now let's see what are the different components. Now Splunk is not one tool that you can just use. It is a set of different tools that you use together to get the result. So let's see, we have two tiers here, or we have two types of components here. We have processing components and we have management components. And as the name suggests, these components do exactly that. So processing components help you to process the data in various ways. You have things like forwarders, which collect the data. It's part of processing. You have indexes that index the data, and you have search heads that help you to search that index data. Now, once you've stored that data, you will need to analyze that data, and that's where search head comes in. Search heads are basically will help a user to look that data. It will look that data up, when you're Google searching something. So similarly, you're using search heads, you can look up the data that is stored in your indexes and perform any analysis or any visualization that you may want to. So all these three components are the part of processing components. They're basically classified into processing components. And then you have management components. You have deployment server. You have index cluster master node. You have search head cluster deployer. You have license master, and you have monitoring console. Okay, guys. Now I know there are just a lot of these names just coming in. You might be getting a little bit confused, but don't worry. Let me just explain this again. Let me just show you. Remember, there are two classifications of components that Splunk uses. You have processing components and management components. In processing components, you have a forwarder which collects data. That's its job. That's its job. It can collect data and it will send it to the indexes, and indexes will store that data. So once the forwarder has collected the data, it will store it in the indexer. Now, once it's been stored, it will need to be searched, or it will be analyzed. So it won't happen directly in indexer. It will happen when a search head searches that data. So that's what it does. Now, you will obviously not have one set of forwarder. You won't have one forwarder. If you have hundreds of servers that you want to monitor, you'll have hundreds of forwarders installed on those servers so you can collect the data continuously. And you will not have one indexer, you'll have multiple indexers because you want to store a lot of data with different kinds of policies or different kinds of configurations. Then you have different kinds of indexes, and hence you'll have an indexer cluster. And similarly, you won't have one search head, you won't have one user using a search head. You'll have hundreds of users in a big company using Splunk, so you'll need different search heads. So the purpose of this is to scale the whole operation and reduce the amount of resources that are being used by each component. So if you have a search head on one server, then it's not competing with an indexer for the resources. So that's why you have it in different areas. So I'll give you guys a better idea when you look at the diagram. Then you have the management components. So management components like deployment server. Now, deployment server's job is to basically manage the forwarders. So how to update those forwarders, how to push in new configurations, those kind of things you do through a deployment server. If you want to remove a forwarder or add forwarder, you do it through a deployment server. Then you have an index cluster master node. Now this, we'll just call it cluster master node. Okay, so master node is basically used for managing all the indexes. Like how deployment server is used for managing forwarders, index cluster master node is used for managing all the indexes. Then you have the search head cluster deployer. Now, a search head cluster deployer is basically used to manage all the search heads, push in any new configurations, remove or add new search heads, etc. Then you have a license master. So how things work in Splunk is you don't pay for the software directly. You pay for the data you are indexing. That's how the licensing happens in Splunk. So if suppose you index 100 GB in one day, you have to pay for that amount, right? So it's kind of like buying your own data. It's like that. So that's how licensing works in Splunk. So you will have different kinds of licensing also. And for managing all those different licenses, you'll need a separate server. That's how they do it. And finally, you have the monitoring console. So the monitoring console is like saying the boss of all. It basically helps you to monitor everything. Monitor the deployment server, monitor the index cluster master node, monitor the search head cluster deployer, and even the license master, and the forwarders, indexes, and search heads, obviously. So monitoring console basically helps you to monitor every aspect of a Splunk deployment. Now let's look at a diagram so you guys will get a better idea of how this is formed. So suppose you are the administrator. There's an administrator, and this administrator will be managing the management tier. Now we just saw the management components, right? Managing components. Like you have your deployment server, you have your license master, you have your cluster master node, you have your monitoring console, and you have your search head cluster deployer. So these are part of the managing tier, and they're all managed by the administrator. And then you have your collection tier. So collection tier, you'll have multiple forwarders that are attached to multiple different data sources and collecting those different data sources, and they will be sending that data to the indexing tier. That is basically your different index clusters. It will be sent through a load balancer. If you guys don't know what a load balancer is, load balancer will basically send the data to a particular indexer based on how much space is available. If it's busy, if the index is idle, it will send it to that. So it's more for optimization of sending data. And like your collection tier is managed by your deployment server, your indexing tier is managed by a cluster master. And then you have your search tier. You'll have multiple users using different search heads. To manage all of these different search heads, you'll have your search head cluster deployer. So this is the basic architecture of a Splunk deployment. Now this will vary from company to company based on requirements. If a company does not have a requirement of having multiple search heads, because there's only one team that is going to be monitoring the whole Splunk architecture or monitoring the data sources, then you don't need multiple search heads. Or sometimes what will happen is that you will join the task of a search head and a cluster together. So this is the basic architecture, but it will vary depending on the need and the requirement of the user, right? I hope you guys understood what the Splunk architecture looks like. So this is how everything is integrated together. Now let's see how data flows through all of these different components of Splunk. So how will data flow? Now, definitely data has to flow between these components, right? The route that data takes through Splunk Enterprise from its origin in sources such as log files, network feeds, to its transformation into searchable events that encapsulate valuable knowledge. So you'll basically be taking log files and network data, and you'll be transforming that data. Obviously, the data you'll receive is raw data. So that happens in your input segment. So in data pipeline, you have different segments. You have input segment, you have parsing segment, you have indexing segment, and your search segment. So data flows through all of these segments. It goes from input to parsing to indexing to searching. That's how the data flows. So we'll see what happens when the data flows through all of that. We'll see in the diagram. So we have the input, in which you have different kinds of monitoring ways. You can monitor input. That's a basic one: FIFO input, UDP input, TCP input, scripted input. These are the different ways of inputting a particular set of data. So basically, once you input the data from your data sources, it will be sent to the parsing queue. In the parsing queue, it will wait its turn to go to the parsing pipeline. So parsing pipeline, what happens when data goes to a parsing pipeline is that it basically gets converted from raw data to readable data in simple terms. But you would call them events. Basically you're turning raw data into events, and they'll be classified under different event types. You'll be doing all the cleaning, all the pre-processing, all those kind of things, so that you can read the data later. Once that has been done, once you've parsed through the raw data that is coming, you filtered out everything that is unnecessary, you will send this data again ahead to your indexing queue. Now, this data will stay in the indexing queue, waiting its turn to go to the indexing pipeline. So indexing pipeline, what will happen is the data will become searchable. Like metadata will be added to it and will become way more searchable. Once you parse data comes in, it goes to the indexing queue, and it goes to the indexing pipeline, and in the indexing pipeline, it gets converted to searchable data, because you need to, in the end, search that data, right? And that data will basically be used by the searching. So that's the last part of the data pipeline. You'll be searching the data, right? So now let's see all of these one by one. So we have input, the first segment of the data pipeline in which Splunk Enterprise acquires raw data stream from its source, breaks it into 64K blocks. Now, data input can occur in an indexer or a forwarder. So again, this is talking about how what your requirements are. If you just want to have a, want to monitor a single server, that's all you're going to be doing in your whole service or product you're providing, then you don't need a separate forwarder. You can just use an indexer, even though it's on you, because if you want your indexer and forwarder to, share resources or not, that is entirely upon their requirements. Then parsing. So in parsing, we talked about it just now. Data arrives, and when the data arrives, the pre-processing occurs. The Splunk Enterprise analyzes the data into logical components. It does field extraction, like you data comes in, and the raw data comes in, and Splunk tries to analyze this raw data and tries to identify what are the fields that the reader might need to know. So it assigns those fields based on its own knowledge and based on what criteria we provided also. Okay, so then you have indexing. Now indexing, let's not go through the whole thing there, but you have, just understand there are two types of indexes. You have event indexes and metrics indexes. Event index is basically a default type of index where you store events, and you can even store metrics there. But if you want to get more advanced, more specialized, then you choose metric indexes. In metric indexes, you basically store only metrics. So in general, the act of processing raw data and adding the processed data to an index, specifically the indexing, is the third segment of the data pipeline. Yeah, so let's move on to the last one. This is searching. Now, the primary way users navigate data in Splunk Enterprise. So when you want to look at this data that you've collected, you go to the searching pipeline. The data moves on to searching pipeline. This happens when the user, basically queries that data. It queries the data from the indexes, and then it searches that data based on the search query that the person has put. Suppose I have certain Apache logs and I want to see a specific set of those logs. Then in the search bar, I'm going to be typing those specific set of log names so I can get them, right? So that's what happens in searching. You create dashboards, you create visualizations also, you get the result that you want. All right, so now let's see what are the different things that these components can do. We know what the data pipeline segment is. We have input, parsing, indexing, and searching in the data pipeline segment, and we have different components. We have indexes, we have forwarders, and we have search heads, etc. So as you can see over here, that input, the function of inputting can be performed by an indexer also. It can be performed by a universal forwarder. It can be performed by a heavy forwarder. Now, it may be a little confusing, but just understand that universal forwarder is basically a very lightweight forwarder. It does not have any extra parsing ability, whereas a heavy forwarder has a little bit of parsing ability. It can parse the data before it sends to the index. So, and then there comes a parsing pipeline. So the parsing segment is basically handled by an indexer or a heavy forwarder. So as you guys can see again, that heavy forwarder can do two things. It can input as well as parse data. And your indexer can also input and parse data. But again, depends on your requirements, how you're going to set up the whole environment and how you're going to be doing all of these things. And indexing can only be performed by indexer. Even though input and parsing can be performed by different components, indexing can only be done by an indexer. And then again, search can be performed by an indexer as well as a search head. Now, when I told you guys about the components, you might have gotten an idea of how these components are, like they perform only single tasks. Well, it's not always the case. Like we just talked about how a heavy forwarder can do two things, how indexer can almost do everything over here. It can input, it can parse, index, and search. But it will all depend on how you set it up and what your requirements will be. All right, so now let's look at a flow of the data. We have servers. The data is collected onto the forwarders. If you have 3 servers, you have 3 forwarders installed on those servers. And those forwarders will collect the data from the data endpoints, and it will ship it to another forwarder. This forwarder can be your heavy forwarder, so that this data can get parsed. So parsing can happen. And then once that aggregation, processing, and parsing happens, it will send it to the indexer. And in indexer, the data will be indexed, it will be stored. And then you can check out how the indexer and forwarders are doing using the monitoring console. And you can use the search head for visualization purpose and analyzing purpose. And if there is any error in the whole data flow, then you can send a notification through Slack or your email. So guys, this is how data flows, and this is the basic flow of data, and previously we saw the data architecture. So I hope you guys understand what are the different components in Splunk, how data flows from Splunk, etc. All right, so now let's check out the Splunk web console. I want to show you guys how the Splunk web console looks. So I already have it installed on my instance over here. So how you can go to it, you can just type in localhost colon port 8000. So basically localhost colon 8000. Just go to your any browser and just type this. You can press enter and you will go. It will open Splunk up for you. So I'll just put in my username and password over here and log in. And you can see that this is the dashboard. I have two apps over here. We'll talk about this. And this is basically your homepage where it'll give you a starting idea, tour of the product, add data. If you just want to add data directly, you can go ahead and click on add data. It will add data for you. Different apps there are, and Splunk documentation. Now documentation is again very important. If you're starting Splunk, documentation will be a great help to you. And we can see here over settings. So settings is where all the meat is, You can check all the knowledge objects like your searches, reports, alert, data models, event types, tags, fields, lookups, user interface, alert actions, advanced search, all configurations. And then you have a system settings, like basically your server settings and server control and system control and your licensing. Then you have user and authentication. If you're an administrator, you'll need to use this, the roles, users, token, password management, etc. And this is the distributed environment. So in the distributed environment, you can configure any Splunk enterprise to become anything. Like I can configure this Splunk enterprise to become a master node that manages all the indexes, or I can configure it to become a deployment server so that it manages all the forwarders, or I can make it a search head cluster deployer so you can manage all the search heads. So you can do many things, and you can click on the monitoring console to go to the monitoring console. I'll give you guys a glimpse of the monitoring console. So this is the monitoring console to give you the basic diagnostics of the system. As you can see, Windows, the server is running on, and the indexing rate, even though it's not indexing anything, this is basically the internal data it's doing, indexing. So it does not count as actual data. And you can see your license usage here. So guys, I told you before, right? License is important in Splunk. Like you pay by the amount of data you use. So you have a limit per day. So you can buy different packages that increase your limit, decrease your limit, etc., etc. So it will show you how much you've indexed in a particular day. And if you cross that limit, you get a warning, etc. Now let's check out adding data. So you can add data to multiple means. You can upload the data, you can monitor it directly from your local host, or you can use a forwarder, use the data coming in from a particular forwarder. Since we haven't, really configured any of these, I'm not going to go through them in this lecture, but you guys can check out our YouTube video. I have done a video where I've explained how to do it with a forwarder. All right, so guys, I'll just show you one more thing over here. So the main app that you'll be using a lot is the search and reporting app. So if I click on search and reporting app, this is where my navigation search bar will come. So I can put search strings and search all the data I have indexed. So right now I don't have any data that is indexed from my system, but I have Splunk data that I can check out. So if I go to the internal, I click on search, you can see all the data over here. So this is how the data would look. Depends on how you stored it. It might be a JSON format or any other format. So it will show you all the data over here. And this is the Splunk internal logs. That's why it's showing us. So guys, that was the Splunk web console. Now let's move on to the final part. So guys, if you have any questions, please shoot. I'll try to answer them as much as possible. Yeah, Ravi Shankar, go on. Okay, so the question is, in each server, we have to install Splunk forwarder in order to do log analysis from that server. Yes, what you said over here is right. When you want to monitor anything from anywhere, you need to make use of Splunk. So let me give you an example. If I have my Windows PC that I'm using right now as my manager node, and I want to monitor that is something on my AWS console, AWS. I've launched an instance on AWS, and I want to monitor an application that I've launched over there. Then I need to install a forwarder on that instance so that I can forward the data from that instance onto my PC. So to collect the data, you need to use forwarder if it's especially on a remote location. If it's on the same system as your own PC, suppose I just want to collect data on my PC itself. If I want to see all the system logs in my PC, I can just ask my PC itself to monitor itself. I can just ask it to monitor itself. In that case, I don't need to use a forwarder. It acts as a forwarder itself. That's why I said like Splunk enterprises can be configured into anything, and a lot of those components can, like your indexer can do a lot of things itself. It can monitor itself, it can monitor, it can parse it, it can do parsing, it can index, and it can do searching also. That's what it can do. So any other doubts, guys? All right, till you guys think about the doubts, let me just show you this learning programs you guys can use. So we have, so learning path for Splunk. Now, okay, we have a doubt here. All right, if I want to monitor AWS server, then should I configure the security group accordingly? Yes. So yeah, you brought up a good question, because it's tough. AWS has its own security layer. So you need to enable it so that all the TCP connections or any particular IP address. So you need to configure your PC's IP address to be able to access that instance, that particular AWS server. Or you can, if you're just testing it out, just learning, just put it to all TCP connections. So any TCP connection can connect there. So you can just collect the data from there directly. Okay. Now let's go to the learning path. So for the guys who've already seen the learning path in the previous session, that's all right. But for those who haven't seen, let me just show you guys. So we have a YouTube channel where I've made videos explaining the same specific things, like Mr. Ravi Shankar asked a question and I explained that, right? So I've already done that in a video on YouTube. You guys can go ahead and check that out. Let me just show you. Yeah. So we have a lot of videos over here. You can go ahead and check them out if you're interested in learning more about Splunk. And if you're a person who wants to get into online instructor-led classes where you'll be taught by a lot of trainers who have had years of experience, just like me, in Splunk, then you can go ahead and register or enroll in our course. We have self-paced courses also that you guys can choose, right? And if you are interested in any other topic or any topic at all, we have started intellipaat.com/academy, where we're giving out free courses, basically not the whole course, but we're giving part of those courses for free so that people can at least get a basic fundamentals, cleared for them, like Java, C++, and all that. All right, so guys, that's the learning path. Use the opportunities you're given. And guys, that was it. That's it for this session. Just use the YouTube 30 coupon code. If you want to buy our courses, you'll get flat 30% off. And this is the end screen. We have the contact details over here. So I'm going to take more questions. Do you guys have any more questions? Okay, so we have one more question. So in case of Nagios, we have, okay, so in case of Nagios, we have to install an RPE plugin in each server. So Nagios and Splunk server, the same purpose and the effort is also more or less the same. Then why we need to go for Splunk considering the license cost and Nagios being open source? All right, so you've used Nagios, right? And if you use Splunk, you'll understand that Splunk, right? It's been optimized highly. It's a very old software. Like they've been working on it for 10 years, more than 10 years, and it's a paid software, right? The slide deck. Okay, I'll inform the operations team, Shrikant Jain. I'll let them know that you want the slides. Okay, and Mr. Ravi Shankar, coming back to your question. So yeah, so with Splunk, the thing is, right, Splunk is more of a logging tool. It's a login tool where you monitor the logs. I get it that Nagios can do it too, but Splunk is very optimized to do the same thing. It's very user friendly also. Nagios is open source. So I brought this point up before in the previous session that Nagios is, you can use it for if you are already know about it, or if you're tech savvy, you can get into it. You have an idea about how companies work. But if you're working in administrative level, right, in a big company like an MNC, you'll have a lot of different people. Like you'll have managers, who have no idea about how to set up anything or work with any of these monitoring tools. Like you have Grafana, you have your Prometheus, you have your Nagios, you have your ELK. They might not know how to set them up or use them at all. With Splunk, it's just very easy to just go through and use it. It's just typing a third string. It's very simple. You just type in which index you want to go into, and you type in what data you want. I'll show you guys how to work with it in the next session, so we'll learn more about it. But it's just to say it's more user friendly. Yeah, and they provide, it's a paid software. So if something goes wrong, like you just said, one more thing, that it's a paid software, so you get a lot of support. If something goes wrong, if your own Splunk developer is not able to solve the problem, or if your own Splunk administrator or solutions architect is not able to solve the problem, right, you can always go to the Splunk support team. It's a very powerful support team. They have a lot of different solutions to your problem, because there are a lot of people will be asking same problems as you, so they'll be able to answer them. So you always have the support team behind. Okay, one more thing. Also, can you quickly go through the Splunk? One second, guys. Shrikant we'll talk about the Splunk cloud architecture in another video. It will take some time to go through all of it. So I'll make a proper video on it. So just subscribe on the channel and wait for any future session updates. All right, so I'll take just one last question, then we'll end the session. So if I want to install Splunk Forwarder in 100 servers, then I can use any CM tool like Ansible or Puppet to do it in an automated way in order to eliminate the malware. Yeah, you're definitely right, Ravi. You can definitely use Puppet. I think there's a documentation also for how to do this. You can use Puppet to install all your different forwarders. You have the universal forwarder, right? So normally you'll be installing universal forwarder. The installation for that is separate. You can install that. You can go and get the link for it, and use a Puppet script and run it on those servers, and you can install forwarders on them. Once you've done that, then you can definitely connect it to your Splunk Enterprise. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. The next session, the continuation of this session, is at 8:30. So make sure to attend it. I will go through a real-time practical use of it. All right. Thank you so much for watching. Bye, guys.